Howdy folks, welcome back to Carter Hall Farm.
Welcome to Carter Hall Farm.
This is video 1 of a 5-video series to build out this chicken coop. In this video, video 1, I'll go over setting the posts and installing the floor. Let's go ahead and get to it.
And the very first part of this project is figuring out where the first fence post is going to be placed.
So that's where the first fence post will go.
This is important. Everything builds off of this first post, and you want to take things into consideration like mowing and yard maintenance. And Aiden and I are going to start digging here. Digging's never easy or fun. We're using a 16-pound breaker bar and an old-fashioned post hole digger. But with the two of us working, we make pretty quick work of this. Now you may have noticed that we selected a spot that's on a slight slope. We thought that that would be beneficial to select a site that was on a gentle slope, and that way we wouldn't have any water pooling around our corner posts that support our chicken coop. Hopefully make things last a little bit longer.
Okay, so we have our first post set, and that's really the most important post to get set because everything else will build off of this one post. Now, as you can see, I have a 2x6 attached to this post running along the fence line. And really the reason why I put that board on is for just a reference. I want to have the distance from this end to the fence as close to exactly the same as that end to the fence.
This will ensure that the post is square on the fence, and therefore the rest of the coop will be square on this fence.
Now, just a note and something to keep in mind, if you're going to be installing a chicken coop close to a fence line, just keep in mind the distance from the coop to the fence line. You want to make sure you got plenty of space to get back there and work on your coop as necessary, maintain your fence, as well as just the weekly maintenance of mowing and weed whacking, that sort of thing. You don't want to make it too tight so you can't take care of just general maintenance. Now, next up, I'm going to be installing the fence post at the far end downhill, and we'll start digging that hole right now.
Now the first thing I'm going to do is attach a piece of 2x material to my first post that I set. I'm going to mark 8 feet down that board, which is the length of my coop, and that will help me identify the location of my next hole. And also using that 2x material will ensure that I remain parallel along my fence line. Now, anytime you're setting a post, whether it's for a deck or a fence or a chicken coop, it's important to get down below the frost penetration line so that the frost heave in the winter doesn't throw your entire structure out of whack. In our neck of the woods, it's at about 26 inches, but to be safe, we're going to go down to about 30, 32 inches per post. So we got a little bit more digging to do. Okay, now we're going to put that big 6x6 post in our hole. We're going to work on getting it plumb and square and making sure we're good on our 8-foot mark. Looking pretty good. Okay, next up we're going to reattach that 2x6 that we used to locate our second post hole. We're going to reattach that, and that's going to help stabilize that post, make sure it stays nice and plumb, make sure it stays on our 8-foot measurement, and stays parallel with the fence line with the first post we put in. Next, we're going to backfill a little bit and tamp that soil down. I like to do this. It's a personal preference. I think there's many different camps on this, but I don't like having my concrete down around the absolute base of the post that kind of creates a bowl. I'd rather have my concrete a few inches up to allow for drainage. That way I don't rot out the base of my post, which is, almost 3 feet below grade. So we're going to simply pour in some Saccrete here, and then we'll add water in the hole, and we'll let that set up. And you may have noticed that we did not put concrete around our first post. We're putting concrete around our downhill post since the weight of the structure is on this post right here. It's the one that's furthest downhill and down slope of the entire coop. And once we got our concrete in our post hole, we're going to make sure that we're still plumb in both directions. Make sure our measurements are all right. Make sure our post is faced on our reference line along that fence line so it's square with the other post. And then we're going to brace it up. We want to make sure that this post stays pretty stable overnight until we're ready to start installing the joisting for the floors. And here I'm just attaching another 2x6 up high just to make sure that these two posts remain square to one another. That's really important when it comes time to put the rim joists on. With our 2 posts set, we got to start digging the hole for post number 3. We'll get that dropped in the hole, and then I'll give you some details on how to square things up here in just a moment.
Okay, so we have our 2 posts set, and we're getting ready to set our 3rd post. But it's really important that this post be perfectly square on this post. And then of course we'll do the same thing for our 4th and final post. Now, to make sure we're square, we're going to use a method called the 3-4-5 method. And basically you draw out a triangle that is 3 feet from this post out, 4 feet from this post out, and then when you connect those lines from the 3-foot point to the 4-foot point, if you're 5 feet to your reference point, then these 2 boards, and therefore the placement of our post, is square with this post. So we have verified via the 3-4-5 method that we are square, and so now we're going to set up and drop our 3rd post in this hole. Lined up.
What the heck? What? Seemed like you had everything under control.
So the face of this post needs to be right on that 6-foot point. Okay. Now Aiden, check for level. Make sure we can get it at 6 feet and be level.
Are you level over there? Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good.
With our post plumb in both directions and at our 6-foot point per our design, we're going to go ahead and backfill this post. This post just gets backfilled with soil that's compacted about every 6 inches that we backfill.
Clear.
And as my uncle used to say, plumb and then some. And that's right on the money. With post number 3 in place, we're going to backfill, and we're going to go ahead and drop in post number 4 exactly the same way we did the other 3 posts. We'll let everything set up overnight, come in the next day and remove the bracing. Got here about the same time as our inspector, Miss Kona. She's making sure everything's backfilled properly. As I finish taking off this bracing, next up is installing the rim joists. And we're going to do this pretty simply by just attaching it to the outside of our posts. 108. Okay. All right. 101.8. We're just knocking off that edge so that you don't catch a hip or a leg on it as you walk around later. And we're going to secure that once we get it level with 4 coated deck screws on each end. It's kind of temporary. We'll come back later and we'll drill through the board and the post and attach it permanently with a carriage bolt.
Go ahead and slide that in.
Now, when it comes to the floor joist, we decided to economize a little bit. Never hurts to save a little bit of money on a project. And we're using 2x4s. These are treated 2x4s, but we're using 2x4s for the floor joists. And our rationale here is that, for the most part, there's going to be 20 to 30, 6 to 10 pound chickens in this coop. This 2x4 floor joisted floor should be plenty strong to hold up all the hens that occupy this coop. But even though we're going with a smaller floor joist with the 2x4s, we are putting them in at 10 inches on center, just because it's going to shore things up a little bit better. And it's time to bring in the big guns to help us out here.
You can put that in a little further.
Nice work, buddy.
Looks pretty.
And finally, to dress
And
things up a bit,
let's
we
call
will
it,
cut out a
16.
2x6
Okay.
to put on the ends, and that'll match up nicely with the 2x6s that cut down the sides and support our floor joists.
Got a little bit of that. The last one.
And here's a quick shot of the finished floor joist part of the project. Next up, we'll bring out the plywood and install our plywood floor. And yeah, what I did here is I painted the exposed part, the part that faces down, of the plywood just to give it a little bit of weather resistance. So it's the same exterior red barn paint that I'm using for the rest of the coop. This is just one of those parts of the project that it's so easy to paint this plywood while it's up on sawhorses in the barn. It was one of those things that I did at the end of the workday. It's not hard to do. Even maybe enjoyed a nice cold beverage while I was doing it. But painting the exposed side of this plywood is going to add years to the life expectancy of it. And little Summer sure is enjoying this part of the project. And as the first video in the chicken coop series draws to an end, We're going to go ahead and chalk some lines, make sure we're on our floor joists, and secure the plywood down. We're going to secure this plywood with 2-inch coated deck screws installed at about 12 to 16 inches on center. In the last video of this video series, I'll paint the interior part of this plywood floor with a 2-part epoxy paint, and it did a fantastic job sealing everything up. Okay, folks, that does it for episode 1. In episode 2, we'll build the walls of our coop, and the first step is going to be painting the T111 siding in our nice barn red color. Before we end, here's a couple of quick previews of what's coming up in video 2. If you have any questions about anything in episode 1, leave them in the comments. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Sure hope you enjoyed this video, folks. We'll see you back here next time at Carter Hall Farm.